Our political commentators are with us. Peter Dunne, good morning to you.
Good morning, Catherine. Good morning, Lianne, too.
Yeah, welcome to Lianne Dalziel.
Hey, nice to hear from you both.
All right. Lianne is a life member of the Labour Party, a former MP and Cabinet Minister. She ran as an independent for Christchurch's mayoralty in 2013 and was the city's mayor for 3 terms. She writes a regular column for newsroom.co.nz. Peter Dunne was the leader of the United Future and is a former MP and Minister who has worked with both national and Labour governments. Used to be in one, actually, a long time ago, didn't you? Thanks, both of you, for being with us this morning. And interesting, because a lot of our topics today have long histories to them, political and otherwise. Let's begin, first of all, with the decision finally revealed at the UN by the Foreign Minister on whether the government had decided for New Zealand to recognise Palestine as a state. Not now, not yet, is the message, Lianne. Your response to both the decision the Cabinet's made and its explanation for it?
Well, for both of them, I would say disappointed. I wasn't surprised, though, because I think that the Deputy Prime Minister, David Seymour, had really indicated that this would be the decision that would be made. And given the comments that he's made in relation to the announcement, I think that he's obviously had quite considerable influence in that regard. It does leave, I think, our country out on a limb. 81% of member states have now recognised Palestine's statehood, and it has done so not as a knee-jerk reaction at all, but actually as a result of in-depth international discussions, who have actually asked those who hadn't recognised Palestine to consider a reversal of the sequencing of recognition. It's really about seeing it as something critical to supporting the ceasefire efforts, to constraining ongoing annexation, which we know is occurring, and protecting the two-state solution. So, in fact, the very opposite of what the government has announced at the UN.
Peter?
Well, I tend to agree with Leanne's point about David Seymour's intervention, but I did feel with the way he was being put down by Peters over that, and Peters travelling all the way to New York, I thought, you're not going to go all the way to New York to announce a non-decision, which is exactly what happened. So I am surprised, I'm extremely disappointed, and I think that we're now in a very difficult position. Because, as Lianne says, there's so many other countries in the UN, 157 or something, have recognised Palestine. And what we seem to be saying is, oh yeah, but we've got a different set of information to all of the rest of you. All of the other reasons that are out there for why recognition's a good thing somehow don't apply in New Zealand's case. I just don't think that's credible.
The comment that David Seymour made that was pounced on was his personal position, but of course we know with Cabinet collective responsibility, you don't get to have one of those expressed publicly around a Cabinet decision, and that's why there was a perception that perhaps this would be travelling all that way for there to be a no. Of the rationale as well, of Winston Peters saying that there's not yet, there's not yet, with Hamas still having its role in Gaza, there's not yet anything to recognise, an alternative to recognise. Is that?
Well, that was the point that Seymour made some weeks ago, and I thought it was interesting that Peters picked it up at the weekend. But it seems to me that every other country that's engaged in recognition has gone through the same process and reached a different conclusion. I think it's either extremely naive or arrogant on the part of the New Zealand government to somehow assume that, based with the same set of facts and information, they can justify a different situation.
Lianne?
They've fallen back on the orthodox definition of statehood, but that's not relevant to the issue that a number of countries internationally have asked the countries that haven't recognised Palestine to take into account. That if we don't take a step now, a new approach, then the very integrity of a two-state solution remains even more distant. So, as I say, he stood there presenting the position of New Zealand, the New Zealand government at the United Nations, but he didn't take into account what the other countries internationally have been discussing for several months now.
What's interesting, though, I was reading about what happened in the UK, and one of their senior ministers, I'm not sure whether, I'm now going to struggle to find her name, I'll go and look for it shortly, is reported to have been very influential with Keir Starmer in arguing a rationale for this, right? What is clear is that within our cabinet there are different and very strongly held views, Peter. And in the end, is there any way you can reconcile that and push on?
I think two things. Firstly, I thought it was significant that Peter's released all of the Foreign Affairs advice. In other words, don't blame us. It's a Foreign Affairs recommendation that we don't proceed down this path. I think the second one goes to the question of leadership. There have been times in the past where New Zealand governments have been faced with contrary advice on international issues from Foreign Affairs and have taken a strong moral perspective and done something else. I think that's what's missing in this case. We seem to have gone the way of very conservative advice and then effectively put that out there for all to see. So if you want to criticise the government for its decision, you really criticise Foreign Affairs for its advice. I think it's weak all round.
All right. Okay, let's have a look at a potential expected announcement this week, actually, on reform, in inverted commas, of the electricity market. Lianne, a lot of speculation. There's two issues here. One is security of supply, and the other is the price pressures that industry and households are crying out over. Now, they're not entirely unrelated, but they can be broken into two parts. What are you expecting the government, the minister, to announce? And will it be fundamental or will it be tweaks, do you think?
Well, I've read two different versions coming from the same minister. I still haven't quite gotten over the irony of it being Minister Watts, but he has taken both the position that this is going to be fundamental and that it's going to be a surgical intervention. So, and the surgical intervention, I would imagine. I can't imagine what it would be that would address the underlying issue facing consumers. I have to say that I'm not excited by treating electricity as anything other than a public good. And when I think of the conversations that we're having around pricing and security of supply, which is absolutely important. But I think of the health risks associated with people turning down their electricity requirements because they can't afford to pay for it. So you get cold houses instead of warm, secure houses, which are actually a better way of ensuring better health and less pressure on our public hospital system. And so we don't end up looking at the full value by not looking at electricity as a public good. And I'm afraid the market leaves me a little bit, unconvinced that it would supply a good result in that regard.
Peter, the issue here is you've got the big gentailers saying, don't muck with us again. We've had all these issues. They were talking about Onslow, so that affected investors' interest in building new supply. Stop chopping and changing. These are big long-term investments. But you've also got, in the government's ear, the Northland Business Group, what do we call them, the Northern Infrastructure Forum, which includes the likes of the Auckland Chamber and a former National Party minister. You've got the major user groups, which are all our big, industrial users of energy. Some of those are either closing or mothballing or downgrading because of the overall costs of energy at the moment. So even on what might be perceived as being their own side, National's under pressure to do something more than tinker here.
Yes, it is. Simon Bridges gave an interview on Friday where he really called out major reform as being the objective. Yet I see one of the power company chief executives, I think it was Genesis, I'm not 100% sure, over the
Malcolm
weekend
John
saying
said that, yeah.
No need for major change. I suspect that we're not going to see much that will benefit consumers directly. I suspect the announcements will be more about supply, and I suspect they will be more related to some of the things Shane Jones has been talking about developing alternative opportunities, in other words, complementary markets, all of those sorts of things. Net effect on the public, I think in the short term, pretty close to zero, but I suspect the tinkering is going to be at that level rather than actually doing something meaningful that's going to make a deal better for business and for consumers.
Leanne, some were calling for separation of the gentailers, which would be, let's face it, it would be a major restructuring, and it would undoubtedly carry implications in the short or the medium term. I don't know that anyone is expecting that in the midweek announcement. The other one was an interesting policy that Labor had way back in 2014, which was the single buyer who buys from all the gentailers and can therefore provide some security over purchase, price and supply. Why did that never happen? You know, there was a majority government in 2020. Why did they not ever get on with that?
Well, I don't know. I wasn't there, and I wasn't there when the policy was produced either. I'd sort of moved on, but one of the things that I just thought I'd throw in here, because and I have to confess to being one of these inertia consumers myself, but around 70% of electricity users in New Zealand are still with one of the four original gentailers, which would suggest that inertia is the bigger driver of who you're getting your electricity from than any understanding of what a market may in fact produce by way of price.
The problem is those new retailers really struggle. They struggle to get the contracts they need in order to be competitive. Some of them are owned by the bigger players, you know.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. All right.
So I don't think that the model is. I think it does require significant reform, and I am interested in that concept that was raised by the Labor Party. I would much rather that National and Labor work collaboratively on this, because I would like us to see entrench reforms for a longer period of time than to have them flip-flopping from election to election.
Not sure we're going to anticipate that this week then. Look, let's have a look at some of the announcements last week. Immigration changes, some flexing of some pathways that would assist some targeted kinds of roles, perhaps another 3,000-4,000 people. I saw one person in the industry suggesting might find it easier to find their visas here. New Zealand First agreeing to disagree. And there were the sick leave changes too. By and large, a lot of people seem to think these were fairly sensible changes. Your take?
Yeah, I think that's a fair description of both, actually. The devil will always be in the detail. I think the idea that we've got a more flexible approach to sick leave entitlement on the face of it is good. How it works in practice, I think, is a question. I mean, I've heard
part-time workers are probably those who miss out here. And there's a lot of part-time workers in this economy.
But I've heard the suggestion that if you can sort of have your sick leave calculated on the number of hours you work, the risk becomes that if you take a doctor's appointment or have to take the kids to school late or something like that, that comes off your entitlement. And I think there's a real challenge here that we don't end up creating a bigger problem than the one that's seeking to resolve. On the immigration front, it seems to me that the New Zealand First thing, to quote Michael Cullen, I think is more of an ideological burp than
that was Treasury else. He was talking about.
Yes, I know it was Treasury he was talking about, but I'm applying it in this case. But I think that, you know, we're an economy that does rely to a large extent on migration for a whole range of skilled and semi-skilled jobs, and we need to make the pathway for people coming here A, more attractive, B, easier to operate, and C, give some incentive in terms of long-term ability to settle in this country. And I think these are steps in that direction. Whether they'll be allowed to get to that point politically is, I think, another question altogether.
Yeah. Leanne, what did you make of the changes?
Well, the sick leave ones sounded good because they had some simplicity attached to them. I think government after government has failed in terms of the Holidays Act calculations, and so it was good to see something that certainly the opposition was prepared to look at as well. And so it sounds good. I do think there's an issue for part-time workers, and again, the predominance of women in the part-time employment market would want me to know the detail. I think the devil is in the detail, as Peter said. In terms of the immigration changes, I haven't looked at them in any detail, but as a former Minister of Immigration, I think settlement outcomes are more important than numbers. And so anything that supports the ease of transition from coming and checking it out of place and then having a secure employment pathway to residence, I think is a good one.
Now, these electoral commission or these electoral law changes that are coming, they were announced a while back. We did some coverage of them at the time. The focus and the controversy has come on to when you can enrol ahead of election day. Now, it's fairly new that you've been able to enrol on election day itself. It goes back, I think, 30-odd years that you've been able to enrol for the fortnight beforehand. I think there was a number posited at the time of around 55,000 votes, but you've now got officials appearing before select committees saying this could be the number. That could be potentially election changing. What do you make of this proposed law change and the case for it, Peter?
Well, the case the Prime Minister raises is that it takes the Electoral Commission too long to count the votes. So therefore you've got to streamline the process.
You get a large number of special votes.
I think that's nonsense, frankly. I think that the pressure should go on the Electoral Commission to improve its systems rather than restrict the franchise. Having said that, I have never been comfortable with the notion of enrolment on the day. I thought when we got to enrolment up to 4 p.m. on the day beforehand was a reasonable step. But I think enrolment on the day, for me, has always been a step too far. And it seems to me that the government wants to go back beyond, as I understand, beyond the 4 p.m. on the Friday. I think to go back to the position that we had beforehand of 4 p.m. on the Friday is a reasonable outcome. But I don't expect it's going to speed up the counting of votes, frankly.
Well, neither was the advice of the Select Committee. You're not going to change that.
I think it's an irrelevant argument that the Prime Minister's raised.
Leanne, is it defensible, this move? To be blunt, what's your position on it?
They haven't used the language of voter suppression as they do overseas, but that is what this is. The official advice is that it will have a disenfranchising effect, and the official advice is that it won't speed up the count. They talked about the number of days, and I was grateful for the link to the article on it, because I hadn't appreciated just how many predicted votes would be disallowed. And so it would shift from 11,000 to 55,000 votes. But the one that really concerned me was the shift of 43,000 to 75,000 votes, electorate votes. So what happens is that people turn up on election day, but they haven't changed their address. And so they would actually be disenfranchised from their electorate vote. And I think both votes are important. We all know the party vote's the one that counts, but the electorate vote is important as well. And to think that number of electorate votes could be disallowed is just, I think it's unspeakable. So I think a trade-off position would be the one Peter came to. But I prefer being able to change things on the day or to enrol on the day. It doesn't make any practical difference at all, but it does give everyone the opportunity to be properly enrolled.
I just note that last week the final result from Australia's general election was declared 147 days after the election.
That was the majority government, wasn't it?
And it was a seat, I think, in New South Wales where the allocation of preferences finally produced a result. So, counting votes is never a perfect outcome.
Yeah.
It does take time.
Look, there's that. And the argument that there's some kind of delay in being able to form coalitions or whatever, if you could stand that up, you could make it. But it's not what the official advice is. And the issue here is, I think, was it last election, I stand to be corrected, 2 seats, National lost 2 seats when the specials came in, which lends this an air of,
But look, I recall in 2014, National decided on the night's results it had a majority, so it would enter its post-election discussions on the Sunday. They were all concluded by the Tuesday, and as a consequence, the deals that were reached were pretty bland and non-committal, which was, from the small party's point of view, quite good. When National discovered after the counting of special votes that it had lost a couple of seats, it suddenly realised that it had signed up to a blank cheque to its support partners, which it might not have done in different circumstances. So, the fact is, you can always go around and do these things while the process is underway.
Okay. Mode of the boardroom. This sort of links back to what we were talking about with the electricity decision. I mean, yes, obviously consumers are in a cost of living crisis and power increases are part of it. The bigger companies are too. And while gas is very much in play for a lot of those big users, the overall costs of energy are a big one as well. What else did you take from the mood of the boardroom, Lianne? I guess everyone focused on the scorecards and the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister being well down on them. Any other messages that you took from that gathering of some of the top business leaders?
Well, of course, we've all had the experience of being in front of the various players at a mood of the boardroom. I remember back in the day when I was Minister of Commerce, I think, Peter, you, me and Michael Cullen were the three signatories to the KiwiSaver. Have I got that right?
That's correct.
I think, yes. Yeah. So we've all sort of been in front of this. I think that the real issue for me is that it's an expression of confidence, or in this case, a lack of confidence. And it was, I think, unusual to look at some of the ordering, but it isn't unique, like it's happened before. So I wouldn't read too much into it. I just think it's just part of the trend that I would want to see play out over time.
It's got into the old debate about the Prime Minister's, popularity challenges and, survivability, essentially. It didn't add a lot to that necessarily, though, did it, Peter?
No, it didn't. I think this is a moment in time which will pass by in terms of the mood of the boardroom's opinions. They're not a particularly representative group, but having said that, they're a group that you would expect to be more inclined to support what a national-led government was doing than they appear to be. I think they're just, like most people at the moment, quite disillusioned. It's interesting they didn't have much nice words to say about the Labour Party either. So it's a sort of a general disillusionment, and I think Leanne's right. It's just symptomatic of a wider crisis of confidence in our community at the present.
It was interesting, Erica Stanford, who of course is Minister of Education and Minister of Immigration, coming in first place. I think Chris Bishop was reasonably high as well. The Trade Minister was reasonably high. Winston Peters' Foreign Minister was really reasonably high. So again, a lot of focus on those two big names, the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister. But yeah, otherwise probably largely predictable. What's also predictable is Treasury's long-term projections coming out telling us that the current settings we have are not sustainable and structural deficits are here to stay. Lianne, you mentioned you'd like to see cooperation between the two biggest parties over electricity policy. Well, there's more than that needs some decisions over time, right?
I agree, and the one that I've been writing about probably more than anything else is the need for collaboration over the infrastructure pipeline, and that doesn't just require central government; it requires local government to be treated as a partner, because it has legal responsibility for so much of the infrastructure, the roading infrastructure, and other infrastructure within cities and towns and across districts. So I think it'd be really important that central government and local government cross party lines and look for that long-term thinking about infrastructure. I always remind people that local government has to do a 30-year infrastructure plan every 3 years. This needs to be blended with central government's commitment over the same time frame.
You mentioned KiwiSaver. Peter, you would have been thereabouts for KiwiSaver, also for the Super Fund, which was Sir Michael Cullen back in the day looking out 3 decades and saying, let's try and smooth that peak of the baby boomers' retirements. Do you ever hear anyone talking about that kind of long-term thinking out of a current crop of politicians? What chance of it?
I've heard a little bit of talk around infrastructure, and I think Lianne, again, is correct. I think that this is the one big opportunity. Just last week, for instance, the first sod was turned for a number of roading projects. One that's close to this region is the Otaki to Levin bypass. Not going to be ready till 2029. That's okay. But I think people want to have some certainty, not just local authorities, I think businesses, I think citizens, about what is actually happening. You don't want to see vast scars in the landscape and suddenly projects get terminated because the government's changed. So I think long-term agreement, and I think there are signs on both sides of the fence at the moment that people are coming to that conclusion. that's got to be the way ahead, and then you can start to plan your investment strategy around that.
What about the financial costs, though, of the ageing population?
Well, I think that becomes
72 is an eligibility age, or
Yeah, but I think that whole, once we've got a better picture about what our broader infrastructural needs are, then I think you can start to address some of these other issues alongside that, whether it's 72 or 67 or whatever, and for superannuation, and similarly with other issues. But the problem is we've always done these things bitzer and 3-year term.
Well, not always, as we said, because the super fund and the KiwiSaver was established.
They would be the exceptions, but they stand out by themselves.
I mean, everyone's ruining the 1975 decision to get rid of individualised savings accounts, Lianne, and what we are seeing now, 50 years later, is New Zealand first talking about ramping up the compulsory amount to be put aside in individual KiwiSavers. I saw one proposal to not have individuals putting anything in at all, per se, but obviously it ends up, in one way or another, coming back to them. Is that an area, again, you might be able to see some long-term cooperation on, ramping up the KiwiSaver contributions?
Yeah, I think that would be, it would make more sense to have an agreed position across a range of governments, because governments will change. This is why I always think that after a disaster as well, one government is not going to be in charge for the whole of the recovery. So why not work on a far more collaborative basis on some of those issues as well? But thinking long term about superannuation and about the links with KiwiSaver, all of those elements need to be taken into account. But can I just throw in a little reminder that we saw pay equity sort of go through the tumbler in a sort of a way that was, well, it's just unacceptable really to do this without any form of public consultation. And so you saw that happen, but we know the impact of changes in superannuation when it comes to women who've had careers disrupted through having children, so there are a whole lot of issues that relate to women that need to be taken into account in determining that whole question around superannuation and KiwiSaver.
You want to talk about long-term planning. If only those accounts have been in place for 50 years for every New Zealander.
Well, Muldoon in 1975 said, what's wrong with the Labour scheme is it will take till 2014 for it to have effect. Well, we're 11 years past that now. Just imagine where we could have been.